As of 2022, there was no country in the world with a worse birth rate than South Korea. Yet somehow, South Korea's situation has gotten even worse.
South Korea has beaten its own record in having the world's lowest birth rate. The average number of expected births for women in the country has plunged to 0.72.
That birth rate of 0.72 births per woman is so bad, if nothing changes, half of South Korea's current population of 51 million people would have disappeared by 2100. Essentially, the country's population would decline by as much as 26 million people over the next 75 years. Now, unfortunately for South Korea, it's hard to imagine how this scenario can be avoided, because the reality is that the population decline is already underway. South Korea's population has now shrunk every year for the last 4 years. And with its birth rate dropping super fast and even projected to go lower, as low as 0.59 births per woman as soon as 2026, all of the data suggests that South Korea's population collapse will only get worse. Now, to understand just how scary South Korea's population crisis is, let's compare the data in South Korea to the data in Japan and in China, two other Asian countries with significant population problems. South Korea's birth rate currently stands at 0.72 births per woman, but in Japan, where the Prime Minister has literally said that the country is on the brink of not being able to maintain a functioning society, the birth rate is still as high as 1.26 births per woman. Meanwhile, in China, where the population could fall by as much as 100 million people over the next 25 years, the birth rate is still as high as 1.09. So with South Korea's as low as 0.72, that tells you all you need to know about just how bad the problem in South Korea is. Now, if you've watched any of my previous videos about population decline, then you know that the ideal birth rate for every country in the world to replace its population is 2.1 births per woman. But the last time South Korea had a birth rate at this level or higher was way back in 1982. So what exactly are the causes of the drastic drop in South Korea's birth rate? The truth is, there isn't one simple answer to this question. Instead, it's a mix of different factors, which are all connected, making this a complex problem to resolve. The first key factor is the cost of childcare, and this factor is pretty easy to explain thanks to one key data point. South Korea is the most expensive country globally to raise a child. In simple terms, the cost of raising a child in South Korea is nearly 8 times higher than the country's GDP. And so in pure monetary terms, this means it can cost several hundreds of thousands of dollars to raise a child until they turn 18 in South Korea. Now, not surprisingly, the single biggest childcare cost for South Koreans is typically the cost of education, because they spend thousands of dollars on private schools and private tutors for their children to prepare them for the fast-paced world of South Korea's corporate economy. Now, the second factor at play here is linked to that corporate economy, and it's the nature of the gender dynamics within this corporate economy, starting with a decades-long gender pay gap problem.
South Korea has once again kept its undesirable #1 position last year in the pay gap between male and female employees. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development said on Sunday that South Korea posted a 31.1% gender wage gap, the largest gap among its 39 members. This means that women earned 31.1% less than men on average. Korea has topped the list since 1996.
Now, with the backdrop of already being disadvantaged, the bottom line is more South Korean women are increasingly choosing to focus on their careers. In a fast-moving corporate culture where taking time off to have a child might at best slow down a woman's career, and at worst, totally derail that career. The knock-on effect here is that young women in South Korea are now actively choosing to marry later than usual, which then results in having children later than usual and also having fewer children overall. Data suggests that on average, South Korean women give birth to their first child at nearly 34 years old. And for comparison, that's the oldest average age among OECD member countries. Another driving factor here is that young South Koreans are not just choosing to delay marriages and marrying later than usual. In many cases, they're choosing not to marry at all. In 2023, a survey of South Koreans between 19 and 34 years old suggested that only 36% of young South Koreans view marriage positively, and this was down from as high as 56.5% in 2012. But in worse news, the majority of the young South Koreans with a positive perception of marriage were men. Among women, only 28% have a positive perception of marriage. Now, in real number terms, this means that the marriage rate in South Korea is crashing, with around 190,000 marriages recorded in 2022, which is a 40% drop compared to a decade ago. The main reason cited by young South Koreans, again, is the high cost of living in the country, with a 2022 survey reporting that young newlyweds in South Korea have more debt than ever before. So essentially, with young South Koreans considering childcare and marriage being too expensive, choosing to marry and have children later than usual, and with women considering childbirth as having a negative impact on their careers, giving a gender bias in corporate South Korea, the result is a birth rate that's already the worst in the world, falling even lower. So the next question here is obvious. What exactly is South Korea doing to slow down this population crisis? Like with most other countries around the world, the answer to that question comes back to money, or more accurately, financial incentives. Since 2006, South Korea has spent over $270 billion to create and offer incentives to encourage marriage and parenthood among young South Koreans. Now, this covers everything from paying couples a baby bonus for every new child they have, to offering subsidies for babysitting expenses, and even going as far as subsidizing the treatment for infertility. But the bad news for South Korea's government is that none of this appears to be working, as the falling birth rates show, meaning the country is facing a dicey future.
If the forthcoming and existing measures fail to produce results, analysts predict that in 50 years' time, the number of working age people will be halved and nearly half the population will be older than 65.
Fixing this problem will likely have to involve fixing the very fabric of South Korea's culture and reshaping its economy to make corporate South Korea fairer to women on one hand, and then to make life more affordable for young South Koreans on the other hand, as they currently consider marriage and childbirth as financial burdens more than anything else. As elections loom in South Korea, the declining birth rate is at the forefront of national conversations in the country, with political parties promising even more financial support in a bid to reverse the declining birth rate. At a time when the average global fertility rate is 2.3 births per woman, it is almost impossible to imagine South Korea's birth rate of 0.72 births per woman getting any worse than it is. Yet, nearly every population-related data point in the country suggests that South Korea's population is headed only one way, and that is in the wrong direction. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, then please give the video a thumbs up, as that really helps the channel, and don't forget to subscribe as well. And before you go, make sure you check out this playlist of other cool geography videos I've made on the channel. See you in the next one.